In this Friday edition of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, Richard Stayman is going to share his list of prospects that he is higher on than the consensus. This is an episode you don't want to miss because I think I'm going to have a little bit of fun here and I'm going to make Richard sell me on these prospects that he's higher on than the consensus. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, Richard Stayman, and we are going to talk about the guys that he believes are, or I should say this, he believes these players deserve a little bit more love. He is higher on them and the general draft consensus. But before we get into this episode, I want to let you know that it is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. I also want to invite you to check out the Locked On newsletter. Your favorite NBA team has a newsletter, so you can check it out at LockedOnDaily.com. So whatever team you support, whether it is the Wizards, because Richard is now in DC, the Mavericks, he's known as Mavs Draft, the Lakers, Wolves, you can check it out, LockedOnDaily.com. It is your one-stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox every day. And if you are not subscribed to the Big Board YouTube channel, the Locked On NBA Big Board YouTube channel, please subscribe. Like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode. We just reached 7,000 subscribers, so shout out to all the new subscribers. We are your source for daily draft content, not daily draft content, almost daily, coming at you at least 5 days a week, maybe around 20 times a month. We are your source for draft content. All right, let's get right into this episode. I think I did mine last week, maybe some prospects I was higher on than the consensus. And Richard had his list of guys, and he reached out and mentioned that he had some guys that he wanted to share with me. And so I just want to ask you from a general question, like, for these prospects, why do you feel like they are not getting the love or the buzz you feel like they deserve?
I mean, part of it's where they play. The other stuff is, I think, guys like Yaxel. I mean, he's at UAB. It's not the hottest school to play at, but also in the American Athletic, it's been a down year for them. And even though they get a lot of games on ESPN2, I think it's an easy game for a lot of people just to skip and say, I'll catch them in March or something if they're in the tournament, or he'll be like a post-draft, or excuse me, postseason kind of watch, let the film get him and be a riser. But I think other guys like Boogie's been out for the year for a couple months now. Payton Sandfort's had a down year. Asa Newell, I think the team around him, like he's a lottery prospect for a lot of people, but I think for him, it's just the team around him. And then Shulga, VCU, they get to play a lot of the games on CBS Sports, Peacock, NBC, like NBC Sports, that kind of stuff, and just doesn't draw the same audience as the games on ABC, Fox, CBS, all that stuff.
All right, let's start with Yaxel Lendeborg, a player that I became familiar with last year. He's that UAB 6'9", 240-pound monster. He's averaging 17.6 points, 10.9 rebounds, 4.3 assists per game. He's also averaging 1.8 blocks and 1.8 steals. Statistically, it is probably harder. You're going to have a difficult time finding a more productive player across the board in college basketball. He has a unique story. We're talking about a guy that went to junior college. I think he averaged like 4 points a game or something like that his first year in JUCO. Just kind of has come out of nowhere. And I have him in my 30s on my big board. Where do you have him, and why are you higher on him than the consensus?
Yeah, I'm going to sound crazy for what I'm about to say, but I have him 18 on my board. I just feel like,
there's nothing crazy about thinking outside the box. We all are just using our personal opinions, and the only people that are probably not crazy are the people that are scared to stray away from the consensus.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. I really like his game though, man. I feel like he's somebody who is just an extremely smart player and has size, and he does everything. Those kind of guys, they really scale up, especially when you have those advanced impact stats that he has. I mean, he's one of 5 players with the 12 box plus minus this year. The others are Cooper Flagg, Ryan Kalkbrenner, Janai Baroom, and it's him, and then a guy from Troy who's not really on radars. But that is an incredible company. Like, he's somebody who, just reading some of my quick scouting notes that I had from when I originally watched him, was like, he's a believer of shot quality, and he doesn't force the first play that comes to him. And that kind of stuff is very rare for a rookie. And I think that's going to help him right away and like scale up. I think he's going to be one of the biggest risers, especially if they make the tournament.
I have an interesting quote from an NBA scout, and I talked about him with the guy. He didn't like him. He said he hasn't played against anybody. He said the only game that he's played where they've played real ranked competition was Memphis, and he thought that he just wasn't good in that Memphis game. So I had to go back and look at the box score and look at the game. They did get blown out by like 23 in that Memphis game, and he was 5 of 10 from the floor. He still finished with 18 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists. But the scout that I spoke with was not impressed by it. And then one of the things that he said that shocked me the most, which I disagree with it, he felt like the kid, or not kid, but he felt like Lendeborg did not have a good motor based off of what he saw that game, and he saw it live.
I feel like so that's actually one of my notes. Is I said the specific thing I said is the only weird note I have on Yaxel is that he rarely sprints. Like, I actually think his motor is good, but I can see, like, I wrote it down. I can see why people may think his motor is low, because he doesn't run like all the time. In transition, he kind of takes his time. And that doesn't necessarily mean, just because you're not sprinting at full speed, to me, I don't think that necessarily means you have a bad motor. Look at him in the half court. He's everywhere. And that, to me, is much more important than being the 5th guy and like trying to make a heroic play. And I don't buy that too much, but I get it. Like, if you watch him at first, you're like, why is this guy going so slow? Like, is he not in a hurry? Is it a motor? And I think it's more just he may not always be in a hurry, which is its own can of worms.
It's interesting because, like, when you look at his production, it's hard to say that he's not active and he's not, all over the place. I mean, even just the defensive numbers, it's a little under 4 stocks per game if you combine the blocks and the steals. However, this particular scout watched him live, and I remember just bringing up the name. He's like, "Oh, that guy doesn't have a motor." He's like, "I don't like him." And this was a game that he saw live. He went specifically to go see him play against Memphis, and he has questions. So it's interesting that you have also in your notes that you don't think he sprints the floor. So it's pretty interesting there.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to like him about him, though. He plays Memphis, by the way, again on Sunday. So a little redemption for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a game that I'm definitely going to be paying attention to this weekend. And it wasn't something I noticed. I'll be honest. I missed that. When I watched my film, I totally missed that. So let's talk about Max Shulga, a player that you've talked about in the previous episode. 6'5" wing from the Ukraine. He's averaging 15.5 points, 5.6 rebounds, 3.9 assists per game for VCU. He's also shooting 45% from the floor. When I looked at my notes, I saw a guy that just kind of does a little bit of everything. The shooting is good, but I mean, he just finds a way to contribute. And his name has come up in some of my conversations with scouts. And the guy that I compared him to was Pelle Larsson, who's playing for the Miami Heat. Maybe that's a lazy comparison because they're both international guys that chose to play college basketball. They both transferred schools. I think they both went to school in Utah before finishing up at Arizona and VCU. But I just thought Larsson was a guy that he shoots it, he can pass, he can create his own shot if he needs to. And he just does enough to where you feel like there is a role for him and a way for him to stick. What are your thoughts on Shulga?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. So he plays his last game of February tonight, but against Davidson, who, by the way, massively underrated player on Davidson, Reed Bailey. Great matchup if you get to watch it. But in February, Max has looked fantastic. I saw him in person when he came and to DC against George Washington. He actually only had 9 points. I walked away mildly impressed, and I watched it back on film, and I was like, okay, I didn't see this. I didn't see this. Some of the stuff he does on offense is really impressive. Even when he was sick, I thought he did a good job. He was winded, but again, being sick, it was easy to make up for. He just is efficient, man. He has 29 assists to 7 turnovers in February right now. It's a 4-to-1 ratio. Like, that's impressive. He's shooting 55% from 3. He shot 42 so far. Obviously, that number's unsustainable. But right now in February, I mean, he's a 55, 55, 90 guy. And I feel like this kind of hot streak, like, he's probably not somebody that may ever start, but I do think he is somebody that gets to be a really good role player. I mean, one of the things we always talk about in the playoffs is role players play better at home. And there's arguably no better non-top 25 team at home than VCU. And a big part of that is because Max Shulga is just so great at home. And I think that's going to scale up to the NBA too. Like, just his offensive game is really good, has a little bit to learn on defense, but I think the jump shot's going to carry him a long way.
Yeah, he's a career 40% shooter from deep over 5 seasons. All right, when we return, I want to find out where Richard has him in his mock. I don't even know if it's an official mock, but just a draft range for Shulga in his personal opinion. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you are looking for a bigger payout, you want more money, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, second segment. So we finished the first segment talking about Max Shulga from VCU. What is his draft range in your opinion? Well, let me rephrase that. Where do you think he'll go in the draft? But what range would you take him in if you were a decision maker for an NBA
I'd
team?
take him at the end of the first round. It's actually kind of funny. I thought his game was pretty similar to Desmond Bane, and a very random, irrelevant similarity. I think it's just a cool stat. Is Desmond Bane was supposed to turn 22 on draft day in 2020. Obviously, that didn't happen because the draft moved to November. But Max Shulga this year is supposed to turn, he's a year older than he will be, but then Desmond would have been at 23 on draft day. So for me, I think there's just a lot of similarities of a much more scaled down Desmond Bane. And I think he ultimately goes in the top 15 of the second round. Again, I would take him in the 20 to 30 range, though, happily.
All right, let's talk about Asa Newell, a player for me personally. I think he's one of the more difficult evaluations for me. And so I want to hear your thoughts on Newell. Newell is a freshman at Georgia. I have him at number 13 on my big board. And he's a player that I talked about a couple of days ago because his team is in jeopardy of making the NCAA tournament. So we may only have a few games left to see him, especially with March around the corner. But he's averaging 15.8 points, 6.8 rebounds. He's shooting 55% from the floor. Phenomenal athlete. There are no concerns about his motor. Why are you higher on him than the consensus? And where do you have him at on your big board?
Yeah, I have him very high. I'll get to that in a second. He's extremely efficient. I think his guard play really hurts him offensively. And because of that, I think his offense has actually got a lot of untapped upside. His three-point shot started really slow to start the year, but I ultimately buy it. I mean, 75% from the line this year on high volume. Against Florida, I think that jump shot had a lot of flashes of looking really good. He kind of went cold, but that game was huge for them also, just going back to the tournament remark. I mean, they had to win it. They played Auburn and then Florida 1-3, I think, or 1-2, whatever they're ranked, like back to back. That's really hard. And they split it, and that could get them in the tournament. Asa is a guy, though, he's an inside out big on both ends. I think he can handle the perimeter on offense and defense, and then also handle the paint very well offensively. And also he absorbs contact great. Like he could easily be an inside out rim protector kind of thing, where if you have him with another big, he can easily switch into that rim protector mode and thrive there. So I'm a big fan of his game. I actually have him number 3. That is probably my, yeah, I saw the eyes go up. That's why I was like, I'm going to get to that in a minute, not lead with it. For me, it's more a statement of my belief in him, as well as I don't know who number 3 truly is. So I'm taking a stab at a guy where I know he's going to be a starter. I know he's got the chance to grow into a 20-10 guy. And that's, for me, I'll take the chance on him. I have limitations around everyone else that I don't have with him.
I think we can make this a full episode because he's a difficult eval for me, simply because to me, I don't know if he's a 5. I think he's too light in the pants to play the 5 now. But if you look at like the measurements, I think he's listed at like the same weight as Derek Lively. So that
I've never heard that phrase, by the way.
What, light in the pants?
Light in the pants. Never heard that in basketball context.
Needs some more rocks in his pocket. And so I think he is stuck between positions. I don't know if he's big enough to play the 5. I don't know if he's skilled enough to play the 4. But if he were, a 5, I think he would be skilled. 1, I don't know about the rebounding. And to me, that can be a little difficult because at Montverde, he played with Derek Queen and Cooper Flagg. Yeah. So that impacted his numbers. Hasn't always had a chance to play the 5 at Georgia this year. He only averages 3.7 defensive rebounds per game. So that's a concern. He's more active on the offensive end on the glass. So when you look at his rebounds, he's averaging 6.8 rebounds per game, but 3.1 are on the offensive end. So that's a concern. And then coming into the year, I did my big board 1.0, and I wrote down, these are my concerns or my questions for each player. And my question for him was, is he a 4 or a 5? Is he going to rebound and protect the rim enough to play the 5, or is he going to show enough skill to play the 4? And I feel like those questions have not been answered this year. And I just have some questions about how does a guy with like a crazy motor, pogo stick hops, is not an elite rim protector. He's averaging the same blocks, if I'm not mistaken, as Derek Queen, a guy who is not considered to be like, a phenomenal bouncy athlete. So I have some concerns about him and I asked some scouts, and I mean, everybody's pretty much had him in the lottery, and they feel like he's situational. He'll be a 4 or 5.
Yep.
But I got my concerns. Sell me on my concerns.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think actually for me, the rim protection, a lot of that is Georgia's system, right? They always have him with Somto, Cyril. I'm blinking. They're another big they have with him that runs out there and plays the paint more, which I think hurts some of his blocking opportunities. But there was a game that I vividly remember against Georgia Tech, I believe, when he was going against, I want to say it's Bay and Dongo is how you say it.
Yeah.
And he shut him down. Like there was nothing he could do. This is a guy who could be all ACC second team, destroyed him. Like had him locked up on the perimeter drives, had him locked up when he was playing in the paint. I thought that game is where you really see the defensive upside of, okay, if he's playing the 5, what does it look like? And this is it. It was a very modern game of what scales up to the NBA. And I buy that. Also, I mean, just looking at his stats, if he was out like 33% from 3 instead of 29.7, we're probably talking about somebody who has a much favorable view of his jump shot than it is now. And I think that matters. And we're talking about like 3 makes, like that 3 to 5 makes probably changes that close enough for that margin of error. So I think that's going to get there. But my thing is, and I also noted the tweener label, but I think he's going to be able to win it both a 4 and 5. And that's where I'm at, is he can post you up. He can also drive off the perimeter, off the catch. And I think that kind of stuff really goes a long way. And he's going to be an outstanding play finisher as a lob threat because of that athleticism you mentioned.
Yeah. Coming into the year, I thought the shooting was going to be good. And right now he's at 29% or something like that. I still buy the shooting. I think he's a much better passer than the assist numbers indicate. And I had to watch a lot of his high school film to see the passing. I think he makes quick decisions. There's a lot to like about him. I just have my concerns because I think he's a tweener. And for a
Fair.
guy that I think his best position at the NBA is a 5, the fact that he only gets like I said, 3.5 defensive rebounds per game and is not statistically and hasn't been like a great rim protector, that's the reason for my hesitation.
I think that's fair. One last thing, the rebounds. I think he wins contested rebounds incredibly well. Like the NBA, you get so many open ones. So I think that number actually will go up higher than that 6.8 in the almost 4 defensive. So just one nitpick there.
Yeah, I mean, he had a 26 and 11 game to start his career. Obviously, that wasn't sustainable. But other than that, he has 1, 2, 3, like 4 double-figure rebound games on the season. Now, he doesn't have games where he's like no rebounds, but he's like consistently to me around like 5, and then he'll have a game where he'll have, like double figure rebounds and it'll be 5 or 6. I just would like to see him rebound a little bit more, but he's been very productive in a absolutely brutal and tough SEC, and that has to account for something. All right, up next, we're going to talk about Boogie Fland. This is another player that I'm a little bit torn on. Richard is obviously higher on him than the consensus, which is why he is in today's podcast. So I want to hear Richard's thoughts on Boogie Fland, because I was really high on Fland coming into the year, but now I have some concerns. All right, last segment. Let's talk about Boogie Fland. Boogie Fland is unfortunately out for the year, and he was in my opinion, an ugly situation at Arkansas. I question the reason he would go there in the first place, especially with, I mean, we knew DJ Wagner was going to end up there, and then Arkansas brought in Janelle Davis, and so I didn't think Fland was going to start. I thought he would come off the bench, and to my surprise, he started, and he was Arkansas' second leading scorer before he went down. Can shoot the ball. I had him in my first round all the way up until my last big board, and I have him in the 40s. And it's not because of the injury, but there's something that I have my concerns. But tell me why you are higher on him than the consensus. Then obviously I am.
Yeah, kind of like you said, I think it was a bad situation where he entered a team that had Janelle Davis, DJ Wagner. I just didn't really get why he had a get out of jail free card almost of, hey, you don't have to join this team anymore. Like it's okay to decommit and find a new home. And like, I appreciate the loyalty to Calipari, but I just didn't like all the roster around him, both his competition and his guys that were supposed to make him better. So I think it hurt him. I mean, I saw him in high school though. Like I really liked the high school tape. He outplayed Cooper Flagg for a solid quarter against Montvert. He was the best player on the floor for a quarter until they figured out, hey, he's the only guy who's playing at high major. Let's maybe just shut him down. And then that kind of stopped. But that flash is just extremely strong. And I still liked his playmaking. Yeah. I mean, 5.7 assists to 1.6 turnovers is pretty wild. I just feel like it's a lot of the situation brought out the worst stuff. There's 2 inherent flaws that I think are hurting him, that it didn't matter where he was going to go, this is going to happen. And one of them is that he takes awful mid-range shots. Like, I just don't understand that. In the NBA, that's not going to happen. So that kind of improves that efficiency without as an addition by subtraction. And then also the defense. The defense is rough. He really needs to learn how to play defense. And that's going to be what determines, does he play or does he not? And if he does he ever get to starter caliber player? That's something he just has to learn. And I hope in the time, that he's recovering, that's something he is focusing on as well, in addition to his outstanding on-ball skills. But with the ball in his hands, I just think he's a phenomenal player.
Yeah, coming into the year, I thought he could be like a Mo Williams type guard. And that was the comparison that me and my brother James had. A guy that can run the offense if you need him to. But if you need him to play alongside a ball dominant guy like a LeBron James, a Luka Doncic, or whoever, he's a good enough shooter to where he can play off the ball, and his game allows him to play off the ball. And even in the situation at Arkansas, even though I'm not a big fan of it, he showed that he can play with multiple ball handlers. One concern I have, it's not a major one, is that he lost every single SEC game that he played in. And I know he played maybe 2 more games after he hurt his hand, but the numbers were brutal. 5 for 15 against Tennessee, 5 for 20 against Ole Miss, 4 of 13 against Florida, 6 of 17 against LSU, and 2 for 13 against Missouri. If you take away 2 of those games and say he played 2.5 games with the hurt hand, that's still 10 for 35 in their first 2 games. And then Arkansas has gotten better since he's been sidelined. I don't think that's his fault. Me and Leaf talked about it. I felt like if you would have subtracted Wagner and kept Fland, it would have been the same results. If you would have subtracted Janelle Davis, I just think playing 3 smaller guards that need the ball in their hands, it's like 3 guards, 6'3". I don't know if that's a recipe for success. And so there are some people that are going to point out they got better without him, but I don't think that's his fault. But the concerns I have is defense. How's he going to hold up on defense? He is on the smaller side. Absolutely brutal finishing at the rim. And if the jump shot isn't falling and he's forced to put the ball on the floor, how does he contribute? That's my concern.
Yeah, the rim stuff is alarming. I think he's good in transition, which will go a long way to kind of mask some of that issues. But in the playoffs, that's not going to work. That's a flaw for him 100%. And I don't know if it's something that maybe it's just the spacing, because in high school it was also pretty rough. I don't know if that's a spacing issue that it helps get a boost. That's probably my biggest offensive concern for him is he actually a 3-level scorer? Is he 2-level?
I think 2.
I think he's 2.5. Like he's really close, but the third comes only in transition. In the half court, he's absolutely only a 2-level scorer.
Yeah, and if he's not allowed the freedom to shoot the mid-range shot, I think that may limit him. He could end up being a player that a coach says, if you defend, I'll let you shoot the mid-range shot. And I've heard players personally tell me the mid-range shot was like their bread and butter, but they had to provide X amount of defensive metrics in order to get the freedom to shoot that shot. But he has the quick first step. He can get by guys, even though he's not like an explosive athlete. But once he gets by his man, it's almost like that's what you want him to do, because he's going to struggle finishing in traffic. Some of it is just he's not like a crafty or creative finisher. And then he's like $175, if that. I mean, that's what he's listed at. And I don't think he can finish through contact. So he's kind of fallen for me. But I do have to understand, even though it's not Kentucky anymore, it may be the new Arkansas bump, where it's a guy that John Calipari's system didn't allow him to maximize his strengths. But I don't know. I just didn't like the fit in the first place. Where do you have him?
Yeah, I've got Boogie at 21 on my board. I'm holding firm I would take him in the end of the first round in that final 10 picks, maybe a little bit before, depending on the team. But it's someone, if you have like an extra pick, like if you're Orlando, I would potentially do it.
Yeah, now that's a place where I think that he needs to go. Shooting. He needs, whoever his representation is, he needs to say, hey, look, if you can get us a guarantee from Orlando, we're not working out for anybody else.
Yeah.
All right, let's switch to Payton Sandfort, who is having a rough season. He's having a rough season. You can make a case and say it is statistically his worst season since his freshman year. He is someone that tested the waters at the combine. I think, was it last year or the year before?
Last year.
And I thought he would have had a good chance of being drafted if he would have stayed in last year's draft. He didn't perform well at the combine, if I'm not mistaken. I think he really struggled there. But I felt like the body of work was enough that NBA teams are smart enough not to judge him just based off of a bad combine. Comes back this year, and the scoring numbers are identical, but the shooting percentages from the field are down 4%, and he's down to 34% from 3. on 7.5 attempts per game, but he's still averaging 16.4 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists for Iowa. And 6'8" wings that can shoot the ball are always going to be appealing to NBA teams. And my question for you is, are you higher on him than the consensus because you believe he's having an off year, or you're just not letting this season impact how you felt about him at this time last year?
No, I value what's happening this year. Like, I think for me, I had him higher last year than I do now. I still have him at like a pretty high spot, I would say, compared to everyone else. I mean, seeing some of the recent boards on him, I know I'm holding true to, and it may be like anchoring, I don't know. But for me, it's my big thing is he's just not going to be the top of the scouting report in the NBA. Like, he's the number one right now. When you play Iowa, you have to the second he moves off ball, they blitz the crap out of him. Like, it just doesn't happen for players like that in the NBA, especially in the role he's projected early in his career. That doesn't happen. Like, it's reserved for the very best of the best that are starting. That's not going to be him early. So I actually think that freedom is going to help him a lot. Like, he plants his feet very quickly coming off of screens. He has everything right. We know he can shoot. Career just about 90% from the line. Like, that's elite upside in terms of touch. So I just think the game comes easier for him in the NBA than it does in college. I just think he's probably too familiar for teams, and him being the first option at times is not the easiest role the easiest job for someone in his role.
He had last year one of the weirdest stat lines I've ever seen in my history of watching basketball. He had a 26-point triple-double, 26 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists, 3 blocks, and a steal against Penn State, and he was 3 of 11 from the floor. Like, how do you score 26 points on 3 made field goals? But he was 2 of 7 from 3 that game, and he was 18 of 19 from the free throw line. He had a strong stretch at the very end of the regular season last year, around this time. Then he had a big game in the first round of the NIT. And then he went 1 for 11 in the game against Utah in the NIT. And I feel like he's had some solid games this year, but from that Utah game to the Combine to this year, especially since conference play, I just feel like I don't know. He's not the same player. It could just be the way he's been defended. But I'll be honest, I have him outside of my top 75.
Which it's common. I mean, I saw another board yesterday that had him 100. Like, I know I'm holding firm. Like, I have him at 30 right now. It's just I value the archetype. I mean, you said at the very beginning, right? He's 6'8" or so, can shoot. Like, he can run off of screens. That's his entire game. Probably comes a lot easier in the NBA. So that's just my hope. 30 might be a little bit rich, but I really buy his game. The thing that really worries me, though, is just the defense isn't good. And then also, I don't know if he's actually, what's the right way to put it? Like, his finishing at the rim. Can he finish through contact? That's going to be a big thing, because in the NBA, you got to be able to attack those closeouts and get to the rim no matter who you are. Even Duncan Robinson actually has a lot more rim attempts than you would think. So you just have to be able to finish there off of those closeouts.
Yeah, with Duncan Robinson, he made so many that every scouting report is telling you run him off the line, and then he kind of had to reinvent himself in a sense. So, but yeah. I think Sandfort is a player that's kind of been forgotten about this year, but you have him at number 30. And I mean, I love these episodes because it just shows you that the consensus, or that people aren't afraid to go against the consensus. That's what I'm trying to say. And I know a lot of times I speak to like young guys that are wanting to cover the draft, and they post their stuff on Twitter, and they may not post how they really feel about a player because they're afraid of the backlash. And, you know, draft Twitter can be pretty brutal at times. Yeah. So shout out to you for trusting your gut. And that's what I always tell people. You gotta trust your gut. I mean, you're going to be wrong and you're going to be right. Yeah. So you might as well trust your gut.
In 2017, that was like, I had finally started doing public scouting reports and stuff that year. My very first like hot take at the time was I had Donovan Mitchell 10. Like, people, I can still vividly remember, I actually posted on Reddit being like, yo, what is this guy? Like, just trying to find conversation about it. Nobody on Twitter. Draft Twitter wasn't much then. And a verbatim reply I got was like, "This guy's a peasant," and I was like, "Am I just missing something? Like, what's going on?" And I still finished with him at 8 or 9 on my board, and actually I ended up low on him. So you just never know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've had guys the opposite. I've had guys that I didn't trust my gut on, and I ended up ranking them based off of the consensus.
Yep.
And the whole time I
Yep.
was right all along. Patrick
Yep.
Baldwin.
I remember those conversations. You were like, if his name wasn't Patrick Baldwin, would he even be drafted? All this, and you nailed it.
And I remember talking to a guy in the Warriors. He was like, the size, the shooting, the pedigree, we're gambling on that. I was like, you didn't say anything about his game. You're saying like the potential as a shooter and so on. But anyway, I digress. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board Podcast. Hopefully everyone has a great weekend. We will be back on Monday, maybe even Saturday or Sunday, but we will be back within the next day or two covering the NBA draft. Once again, please check out the Locked On newsletter at LockedOnDaily.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. And then thank you for making this your first listen of the day. And we are out of here.